thanks to all you guys for joining. I know it's time out of your day, but hopefully I'll be able to convince you that it's time well spent. And before I sort of get into the main body of the presentation, I think this presentation was, originally derived years back before I joined the business. I've only been with Syngenta 7 or 8 months now, but I think it's very timely in the sense that costs are only sort of going one way for growers, generally up. Labor availability is one of those things that's getting harder and harder to come by. So anything we can do to reduce inputs there, so we're not needing to spend as much labor time on it, we can put it into other things like packing up and production and that kind of thing. And also the options we've got available to us in terms of chemical controls and biological controls are on a downward slant as well. So sort of all of the pressure points we've got on spraying are coming together. So hopefully we'll be talking about optimizing what we've got available so that we can sort of get the best out of it. So yeah, as Connor said, I'm Sean Loakes, technical manager for the UK and Ireland. I cover ornamentals, turf, and pest control. So I have lots of different hats I wear, but I don't really tell everybody this. But ornamentals is definitely my favourite bit. So I'm happy to be doing this today. And what I did before joining Syngenta, I worked in contract research labs. So we would take the products from all different kinds of sponsors, some from Syngenta, but all the big sort of manufacturers. We would take those from sort of initial concept and screening all the way to sort of field trials. So some projects you would just have for a little time, and some you would training up and going all the way through. And so we would work with a lot of different application techniques. So yeah, just to get into the presentation, we're going to kind of start quite high level and thinking about application technology. It's kind of one of those things that there isn't a perfect answer, and that sounds a bit of a depressing thing for me to say right at the start of the webinar. But that's kind of the truth of it. And really, when we're considering doing a spray, we want to be sort of considering these bubbles that you can see on the screen here, and there's always going to be a compromise, and we want really to embrace that, not to sort of shy away from it, but we want to actively embrace the sort of conscious compromise is the best way to say it. So think about that pink efficacy bubble we've got there. We know that if I go into a glass house and you gave me a knapsack to use a sprayer with a single nozzle knapsack, I could spend a whole day spraying, let's say, an insecticide, because that's my favorite aspect to talk about. I could spend the whole day spraying an insecticide, and I could use a really low water volume, and I could use a fairly small amount of product and go and spot treat around the whole nursery and get really, really high efficacy. But that's obviously going to have impacts, in terms of my work rate. That's going to be costing a lot. You've got to pay someone to do that for a whole day. So yeah, efficacy is really, really high up the graph, but it's dropped us right down in terms of like work rate and timing. And then in terms of drift, maybe it's good, but then again, it's really taking a long time. And then another option is you have a big spray that's going to go really fast, get it done really quick. It's going to be maybe much better in terms of work rate, but then in terms of drift and in terms of efficacy, you're really pulling it back. So you really want to be thinking about all these factors and how they come together to get that sort of optimized application, because whichever way you do it, you're going to be pulling on one of those parameters in a different way. And all the factors we're going to talk about today are going to impact on this kind of graph in a different way. So they're really important things to be thinking about. So some of the main things we'll be talking about are nozzles, and there's a lot of different nozzle choices out there. And generally when I'm talking, I'll try not to talk about specifically Syngenta products. I want this to kind of be an open thing so you guys can sort of get the best out of it. I'll try not to be, there'll be some times when I do mention products, but if you want to imagine a competitor product, and that's absolutely fine. I'm fine with you doing that in your minds, and it's probably just better to just think about the products that you're using, and we'll try and keep it non-company centric. Water volume is going to be a really, really important one, and as we talked about at the start in the introduction, water volume is something we're having to look at, and a lot of the work we do is in the Netherlands. We have a big ornamentals team there, and it's not really a big problem there, water usage, because essentially around every glass house that you visit, there's a canal, and there's just water everywhere. So they're not really feeling the water pinch as much as they are in parts of southern England. But in Northern Ireland, I know you guys have a lot more water than we do again, so maybe it's not hitting you so hard. But water usage in a lot of areas of the world is something that's being brought into focus more, so it's something we're having to consider with our spray applications as well. Another thing is drift. So boom height and speed are going to affect that, and we'll go into that in more detail. And then we're also talking about doing it digitally, so the sort of digital support tools that are available in the space as well. So these are sort of the components that go together to make good application, and this tower right here I do like a lot. So really product is the mainstay of it. It's 50% of what's going to go on. So that's saying that if you have a good product at controlling weeds, let's say, and your application and all the top things are done really badly, the product will still do a certain amount of the work itself. So that's just a guy, you know, going through the nursery, just kind of sprinkling it with a watering can, doing very low very low technical skill. You're still going to get some control. But what we're really interested in is this sort of top 50%. So the timing and the weather, the mechanical and the tuning. And if we can get those things right, we've paid the same amount for the product as the guy who just goes in with a watering can and just kind of splatters it everywhere really messily. We've paid the same amount for the product as him, but we're going to get much more out of the product if we can get these things right. And that's the kind of area we're going to be focusing on. And this is a nice thing, you know, if you aim for a target, if you know what you want to achieve, you're much more likely to achieve it. And I think that's a difficult one. It's an easy one to say and a hard one to sort of commit to, the idea that think about what you really want to achieve with this application. So if you're applying an insecticide and you need to control thrips, then think, do I need to contact the thrips directly? Or is it okay if I miss and I just hit the leaves? Or is it okay if it goes in the soil? Thinking about that and aiming for it, and thinking about that when you go into your sprayer setup is gonna be a big advantage. I know a lot of nurseries have lots of different crops, so it can be hard to consider lots of different things. And maybe if you're monoculturing, it's going to be a lot easier. If you're just growing poinsettia, then it's going to be really easy. You just like, right, I just know what I want to do. Yep, I just go out and do that. All the crops the same heights, nice and easy. So it's, you know, it's easy for some people, it's going to be more difficult for others, but just considering what you want to achieve for different sprays. So if you want something that's going to go in the soil, don't use the exact same setup for something that you want to stay on the leaf, because you're not going to be achieving optimized results for both of those. An important thing to start on, and I sort of added this slide in this evening when I was thinking about it just before the webinar started, is sort of sprayer love. And it's a lot of nurseries I go into, a lot of grower setups. It's the sprayers sort of in a dark, dank corner in the back, and it's something that it doesn't get much love. It's often got some cobwebs on it, and there's some sort of staining to it, and it's not the most loved piece of kit. And you can sort of see why. It's something that it's a job that maybe not everybody loves doing. But I think a good calculation is to do is sort of just add up how much product in terms of like cash goes through that sprayer in a year, and then think about it differently, because there's going to be a lot. And you know, I work for a chemical manufacturer, so we're charging some of those prices. So yeah, it's partly on us, but it's the costs aren't getting cheaper as time goes on. So just consider how much money is going through that sprayer, and how much making sure that sprayer is doing a really good job for you is important, because you want to be getting the most out of what you're using. So if you've got a sprayer that's really beaten up and you're like, I don't want to invest in it because I've got to buy another bottle of the next product I've got to use, just consider that as part of it as well. So so making sure it's calibrated, that's going to have a big effect. You know, the manufacturers are going to do a lot of work on finding out what is the optimized rates to apply it at. And if it says apply it in 200 liters of water because that's the best thing, that's going to keep it on the leaf, let's say for a foliar application product, then if you're thinking you're applying it 200 liters, but your spray has not been calibrated and actually you're applying it more like 300-400, then again, maybe you're not getting the best value out of the product. So you might be trying to do the best thing, but actually if the sprayer hasn't had the love and it hadn't been calibrated, then you're going to struggle to achieve that same return. And make sure it's clean. We see a lot of sprayer nozzles that can kind of get gunked up, and when just one nozzle blocks up in a boom situation, it's going to affect the pressure in all the others. So it's going to be hard to get an accurate spray if some of your nozzles are gunked up. So it is worth investing that time, just giving it a regular clean. And consider investment. So I think I went to see a grower recently in Southeast England, and I said, well, the sprayer that's quite old. What do you would you replace that? And he said, yeah, I'll replace it when it's done, when it can't spray anymore. That's it. And I thought that was a kind of response. I don't know how far that goes in the industry, but it's a kind of scary response to me, because I thought the amount of money we spend on the product, it's worth considering investment for a sprayer. So that's something. I don't get any shares in manufacturing of sprayer devices, so I'm not getting anything out of that. But it's something to consider, that if you know you're spending a lot on products, you know you need to get that level of control, then sprayer technology can be a really important component. So I'm not really going to touch on the actual sprayer units themselves in the presentation, because that's not my area of expertise, but it is something to consider, because that will have an impact on the rest of the activities that you guys are doing. Right, so to get into the presentation, so let's start with product and what do we need it to do. So we've got sort of different types of AIs, and that's the first thing to consider. So if it's something that's needing to be in the soil, then that's going to be a big consideration. If it's something that needs to stay on the leaf, then that's going to be another consideration. And if it's something that needs to directly contact the pest, whether that be a disease or an insect or a weed, those are all kind of considerations you want to be thinking about when you're thinking about your AI. So they're going to come in all different forms. You've got sort of a crude lumps or fine powders, you've got viscous liquids, you've got gums. There's all different kinds of AIs and how they come. And then the next level that they take it to is the formulation. So these are all the different kind of things that they can add in to make those AIs there, which, you know, maybe this lump, these powder, you might put it into water and it might be, you know, not water soluble. So they use all the different kind of hocus pocus that gladly I don't need to understand to turn a powder which maybe wouldn't go into water very well, doesn't solubilize into something that's going to work well. So maybe the product is a powder that only is going to solubilize itself in an oil. So then they'll solubilize it in the oil and then they'll mix the oil with the water, and then you've got a product that can actually be used in a real life situation. So a lot of the time we'll just look at the headline of it, we'll just look at AI, but it is important to consider the formulation as well, because the AI might be the best thing in the world at controlling powdery mildew, but if it doesn't get to the target site in a usable manner, then it's not really going to be doing a very good job for you. And then the third thing to consider is the target. So whether you want it on the foliage or whether you want it on the soil. And this one for us is the toughest. So when I'm talking to the turf guys, it's kind of easy, because it's like, if you want it as a soil product, you just apply it at this water volume. If you want it as a foliar product, it's this volume. And yeah, there's a little difference if they're doing it on a long sports grass in a football stadium or in a really short grass on a green. But when we're talking about ornamentals, the sort of plant architecture can be really, really different. You know, when you've got something that's got huge waxy leaves, or something that's got fine hairs on the leaves, something that's a tiny little plug, and something that's an absolutely huge plant that's ready to go to market, those things are all going to have huge factors on how you target what you're going for. So there's going to be big differences between those different situations. So, and then the first big thing we're going to look at is water volume. We will also look at sort of the best droplet size. We'll talk about what the target is and what's the product. So water volume, and when I do this one live, I'm not going to do it today because it's a bit sad sitting in my upstairs bedroom. But when we do this live, we tend to have a demonstration. And when you're talking about water volume, it's kind of a really good thing to think about. So when I think about a low water volume, so let's say something like 100 litres a hectare, I really like low water volume. There's not going to be that many products with a label like that, like very low water volume. That's going to be equivalent to think about something like just a classic small shot glass. You know, it's going to be very concentrated in there. Every single, if you were to take your finger and touch it, your finger would be, you know, looking like and smelling like the shot, because it's full. So if you put in your shot glass, let's say just a red dyed with the liquid, you'd see most of the shot glass was very darkly red. It's going to be very strong in that. And if you had a big, let's say a big wall of paper, and you threw the shot glass at it, where the droplets hit, it's going to be very concentrated, isn't it? You're going to have a lot of like dark red spots. It's going to kind of look like a murder on that area. But actually there's going to be big areas of white around those red spots that aren't going to be hit, because at the end of the day it's very concentrated, but you've only got a small amount of water. So let's take that up to the next size. So let's say something like a half pint. That's going to, you know, if you put that same amount of product in, because that's what we're doing, putting the same amount of active in each time, the only thing we change is the volume of water going in. Say that half pint, you pour the red shot into there, fill the rest up with water, it's going to be a lot more diluted. And again, we do the same exercise, clean piece of paper, chuck it at this big paper wall. What is it going to look like? Well, it's going to be a lot more spread out. You're going to have better coverage, but you'll probably also notice that a lot more of the water goes on the floor. So, you know, a lot of it did hit the paper, but a lot more ran off because the water volume's gone up. But overall, we've got much better coverage, but it's kind of looking less bright red, less bright pink. And then let's take that all the way to the extreme, to the like a full-on, you know, like a pitcher that you might get. In that, when you put your shot in and fill it with water, it's going to look really, really quite dilute, isn't it? Because the amount of active loading in there it's the same amount of active, but it's really, really dilute. And you chuck that at the wall, you're probably going to cover the whole big piece of paper with water. Everything's going to be wet, but then also loads of it is going to be going on the floor. So a situation like that, a really high water volume, something like 1,000 litres a hectare plus, depending on your crop architecture, also that does play into it. But really, really high water volumes, like 1,000 or 2,000 litres a hectare, that's going to be good for certain situations. So if you want to get the product down into the soil, so if it's something that needs to be soil acting, if it's going to be going against root aphids, or if it's going to go against vine weevil, or one of the fungal diseases affecting roots, then you're going to want it in that space. There's no point. Any of it left on the leaves is a total waste of money. You've paid for it and it's now left on the leaves and it's not doing you any good. So you want to get as much of it down there. So a high water volume works really well there, because it's meaning that each droplet of water has a very small amount of active in it. And as it's going onto the leaf, as it's being sprayed onto the leaf, more and more and more of it is being washed off and it's going down into that soil. So higher water volumes, really, really good for something like that, for a soil application. And those lower water volumes are going to be a lot more dangerous to use. So there's not many applications, I think, where you want to go less than sort of 200 litres a hectare. Obviously, always look at the label and use that for recommendations. I'm going to be speaking very generally, so try not to hold me to any label recommendations here. But generally, then that in-between section, that sort of 200 to maybe 600 or 200 to 800, that's going to be kind of where you want to be targeting those foliar applications. So if we're looking at really small plugs, we don't have much scope for runoff. So something towards that lower end is going to give us better coverage, because we want it concentrated. What I guess a trap a lot of people fall into is they want to get really good coverage. So you're like, right, I want to spray it with a lot of water because I want to really spread that active out and get it everywhere. But what you also want to consider is, as water volume increases, your potential for runoff increases. So there's only a certain amount of holding capacity on a given leaf. Once you get over that, yes, more active is coming on, but it's also like the water is just washing away active that was there already, because the way it works is it's not depositing the active straight on the leaf. It needs to be there for a while to be absorbed by the plant, depending on what it is. So if you need something to be contact acting, that's really important. So if you're talking about like a biofungicide that's going to be controlling powdery mildew on leaves, you need it to be on the leaf. You need to have really good coverage. So you want to get that water volume right. So something 200 to 400, depending on leaf architecture, is going to be really good there, because you want to be covering it. If you're talking about a systemic chemical, then you can probably err on the sort of side of lower water volume, because it's more important that you don't get runoff there, because the plant is going to absorb it from lots of different places depending on how systemic it is. So that's where we start to that critical thinking comes in, of thinking about what I want to achieve, the product I've got, so how is that product acting, and what pest am I going against, and then what is going to be the optimum for what I want to do. And this kind of feeds into tank mixing. So we'll speak to some people and they're like, yeah, I need to get a spray done. I need to achieve two things. I need to get this product into the soil to deal with the vine weevils, and I need to get this product to stay on the leaves and the flower to deal with thrips. And you're like, okay, that's nice. You're trying to optimize labor, like just do one spray instead of two. But in that situation, I think we can all see one product needing to be in the soil, one wanting to stay on the leaf. You're making a big compromise there, and you've got to think, am I achieving what's best for either of those? Because if we do a really high water rate, the product is probably going to get down for the vine weevil control, but it's probably not going to do a very good job of staying on the leaves for that thrip control. So just considering whether it's a good compromise. Again, it might be a compromise you have to make, but where you can in that kind of situation, I would say probably don't make the compromise, because it's going to be a huge compromise for both, and you'd be better off splitting those two sprays, and you're going to get much more out of each of them. Especially if the products are expensive, you want to get the value out of those products you're using. So we come on to nozzle choice next. And again, when I'm doing it live, I have all the little nozzles, but again, we'll have to use my hopefully good visual representations with my words to talk about it. So nozzle choice is a really important thing for controlling drift reduction, and generally with droplet sizes, the smaller the droplets are, the less power they have in them. So when we think about a really big droplet, what we do in the demonstrations is we throw something large like a football, and we say, yeah, the football's there. And we would remember if you were in school and people have kicked a ball at you. I was never good at football, so people were kicking balls at me more than passing to me. That ball's going to have a lot of power in it because it's quite large, and it's the same with large droplets, and that's why they're really good at pushing down through the canopy of the plant and getting into that soil, because they're traveling with a lot of momentum because they're a large droplet. So you throw a football, it's carrying a lot of strength. The same with these large droplets. So if you're using a big white 08 nozzle, something like that, that's going to carry a lot of charge with those droplets, and it's going to push them down through the leaf canopy. It's going to cause runoff, but in a soil acting product, that's what we want. We want it to run off the leaves, run down. So it's coming through the canopy with a lot of power. And then at the other end of the spectrum, we represent the drifty, the tiny little droplets. We represent those with a ping pong ball. So you'll know if you've played ping pong or if you've just thrown a ping pong ball. Yeah, you're aiming for it just the same way as kicking a football, but it doesn't go where you want it to go. It starts sort of drifts off at the end. It sort of changes its direction as it starts to lose momentum. Because it's so small, no matter how hard you try and throw it, it's gonna, you know, if you try and throw it harder, it's gonna go a little straighter for a little longer, but it's gonna kind of lose course. And that's the same with very small droplets and drift. And drift is something we sort of think about in agriculture as a bad thing, because it's like, you know, don't spray outside. And some nurseries will be doing outside sprays. So it's, you know, it's obvious, don't spray on a really windy day because you're going to get drift. But you do also get drift without any wind. So if you're in a perfectly unwindy day, you're still going to be getting some drift. So drift reduction is a really, really important thing. And that's something nozzles can do. So even if you're spraying in a glass house and there's no wind, just the movement of the boom can cause drift. So that kind of momentum you get behind is going to pull droplets away from the one. And when we think about drift, it's an environmental impact, but I also think of it more in terms of a financial impact. So any spray that's drifting onto the concrete paths is a waste of money. You guys have paid for product, but actually the product has ended up on the concrete path, or it's ended up on the glass, or it's ended up on the roof. It's drifted away from the target size. What we want to achieve is getting as much of that target, much of that product onto what we want it on. So if we need it on the thrips, it needs to be heading towards the plant. If we need it on the powdery mildew, it needs to be heading to the plant. We don't want it drifting to other sites. It's bad for environmental impact, but it's also bad for us because we've spent money on it and it's not going where we want it to. So those kind of middle droplet sizes, those are the best. So what we would say they're equivalent of a tennis ball. So yeah, if you throw it far enough, it is going to start to lose it, but it's going to hold that strength for longer than it would with a ping pong ball. It's not going to have the same strength as a football, something very large moving through the air, but actually it's going to go from the nozzle down to the target in a manner that we want without starting to drift. We don't want it to come halfway at the nozzle and then sort of get lost along the way and go. Yeah, so controlling drift is a really, really important factor. So choosing the right nozzle is a big step, and also the modern nozzle technology. And Syngenta does a range of nozzles, but there's loads of different manufacturers that are doing really, really good things as well. And there's the kind of technology that goes into nozzles has come a long way. So air induction nozzles can do things like you've got a droplet size that's this big, and what an air induction nozzle is, it'll push it out and it will basically put an air bubble in the middle of it. So it's making it feel more like the football. It's making it seem like a bigger droplet, but actually it's got the same amount of liquid in it than the small droplet. So air induction nozzles can be a really useful tool in that way, and they can reduce drift. So I think Syngenta's working on the newest kind of drift reduction nozzles in the crop side, which hopefully we'll get through into our side of the business soon, and they'll be sort of 90% drift reduction. So that means that you can spray them and you're going to get a lot less, 90% less drift occurring, and it's going to be a really, really good thing for making sure the product goes to the target. And a really, really nice step. So nozzles is definitely something to look into. So, the first thing I talked about was sprayers. Yeah, a sprayer investment is going to be a lot. It's a big piece of kit. A lot of places have got sort of long waiting times for getting new sprayers, but nozzles less so. It's much smaller investment, but having good quality, clean, and sort of undamaged nozzles is going to be the next big win. I don't know how much a pack of nozzles costs, but it costs probably less than any product you're going to buy. So investing in clean nozzles and making sure they're working really well is definitely going to be a no-nonsense way to sort of get more out of the products, and it's going to be a really, really good, easy start to have. And just considering the nozzles for what you want. So if you've got something like the sort of purple nozzles are going to be really good for a very fine droplet size. The red nozzles are going to be an 04 nozzle is going to be giving you sort of those middle range, sort of tennis ball size droplets, and then the white nozzles, the 08s, are going to be something that's going to be a lot larger for the sort of soil application. And just considering which kind of nozzle types you want and making sure it's in line with sort of what the manufacturers are recommending in terms of the pressure. And I think another trap that people can kind of fall into with pressure and with droplet sizes that you think, right, I've got a plant that's a dense canopy, I need to get control of whatever insect or whatever fungi that's in this canopy. And so how am I going to do that? I need to get nice fine droplets, because we know that fine droplets do give better coverage than very coarse droplets, but they're also much more likely to drift. So it's always a compromise again. But what we want to be thinking about there is sort of making sure that we get the right kind of, achieving the target. So if we've got a dense canopy, what we might think to do is increase the pressure in the boom. So you think, right, it recommends 3, but I'll work it up to like 5 bar, and we'll get much better pressure. It'll push down into the plant, and that's a kind of popular misconception, because what actually happens is the more pressure you put through the boom, what happens is the larger the number of sort of small drift droplets you're going to get, because you're forcing it through the same size aperture, and so then it just it splits those water droplets more and makes more fine drift things. So you'd think they'd have more punch, but actually it just means there's a higher profile of small droplets. And as we talked about at the start of this section, the larger the droplet is, the more strength it has and the more it'll go in that direction. So you want to be kind of controlling it in the optimum area. So that's why we would recommend sort of those mid-sized droplets, not cranking up the pressure, using those mid-sized droplets that are going to have the strength to push down into the canopy a little better and give you that kind of coverage without causing runoff. So it's one of those things that there's no perfect answer for every application, but it is worth having an option where you can sort of switch out nozzles easily, and so you can get the best out of those. But I think that's somewhere most growers are already quite good on. So another consideration is leaf wetness. So thinking about the state of the leaf prior to application. So I think when we're talking about sort of indoors, it's something we probably don't really think about too much. The only consideration indoors in a glasshouse situation is going to be irrigation. So if your irrigation system has been on like an hour before, and then you're thinking to do an application, just consider that that leaf is already quite loaded with water. And you can see in the pictures there, if you to add, I think they were saying a heavy dewy morning in a sort of turf grass situation is the equivalent of something like 9,000 litres a hectare of water already being out there. So if we're trying to avoid runoff and we've already got that much water on the leaves, you know, in an outside situation, a dewy morning, or if you've just had rain or there's just been irrigation, that is going to have a big impact on your product performance, because you've already got a lot of water out there. So even if you sprayed at a very low water volume, you're going to be getting runoff pretty much straight away. So you're going to be losing a lot of your product. So you're not achieving your goal. So just considering that, and I think that's going to be fine for most people with irrigation, but just making sure you check that if, you know, what is the irrigation timing in relation to the spray timing. You wouldn't want somebody to have irrigated just before, and you wouldn't want somebody to be irrigated just after, because obviously your product's just been on. So making sure that product's dry before the next irrigation cycling. Just consider that with your spray window. It's obviously more complicated with rain. And again, dew is another one that's complicated, just avoiding that. So making sure the crop is dry and you've got a dry leaf, because if it's something that needs to get absorbed and it's staying in water droplets or it's running off, you're not getting that value for money again. So yeah, a dry leaf is really, really important for kind of getting the most out of pretty much all those kind of products. Adjuvants is another thing that's important to consider. And it's a tool that's becoming more and more relevant as time goes by. And there's a wide range of uses in the ornamental production sector. So it's again thinking about what you want to achieve. And I'm not sure what the most popular adjuvants are out there for you guys, but I think generally from people I've spoken to, it's been sort of organosilicates, something that's going to be sort of a spreader, and they can be really good. And in a certain kind of applications, they are going to have a really good effect. So if you're spraying something at a low water volume, and you just really want it to spread out. So if something like a biofungicide against algae mildew again, you want it to be spreading out as much as you can. Now, an organic silicate, when it spreads, it is also going to lead to more runoff. So that's why you've got to kind of really consider the amount of water you're putting on, because if you're putting on a lot of water and you're spreading it, it is spreading it, but it's spreading it right to the edge of the leaf, and then it's meaning it loads a lot there and you do lose some. So just considering what you're trying to achieve and whether an adjuvant is helping you in what you want to achieve, whether it's actually going to be hindering you. And there will be some situations where adding an adjuvant will make the application worse. There's not many of those situations, but it's just considering what you want to achieve. So it's a conversation I think Syngenta wants to have more. We're kind of waiting for some registrations. So in the Dutch team, they already have Assist, which is a sort of uptake enhancer. So that's going to be great for products that you need to get into leaves, things like PGRs and insecticides that are going to be acting systemically, and fungicides that are going to be acting systemically. That's a product that acts really well in getting the product to go into that waxy membrane of the leaf better and get uptake better. So we're avoiding the conversation at the moment. So I haven't really given this part of the presentation to anyone else before, but it's something I wanted to talk about today. because at the moment we've got one adjuvant Syngenta, we've just got one that's a sort of sticker spreader, so it's going to kind of hit the leaf, spread out, but kind of keep it on the leaf. And once we've got 2 or 3 adjuvants, it's a lot easier to have that conversation and say, right, this one does this one does this, and this one does this. They are all going to achieve different things. So it's just thinking about what you want to achieve. And they can aid efficacy in the right situation. So just as a product example, which I said I was going to try not to do, so our product did reduce the amount of PGR required in a given crop by 25 to 50%. So it's going to be one of those things that you can consider, because it's making the PGR sort of stick and stay on the leaf, and then it's got chance for it to be absorbed. So if you're spending a lot of money on a PGR, then putting it with the right adjuvant can be a really easy win, because yes, you're spending money on the adjuvant, but actually you're saving a lot on your PGR usage, and it will depend on the crop, on the PGR, and on the adjuvant. Generally, you want a sticker spreader, something that's going to get it on the maximum area of leaf, keep on the leaf, avoid runoff. So you've got the maximum amount of AI that's then able to kind of go into the leaf and be absorbed. And like I said, because there's so many variables, you'll want to try it on a smaller area to see, can I reduce it by as much as I'd like to, and get the same effects that you're trying to achieve. So yeah, so things to consider would be compatibility. So is the adjuvant compatible with my active? Is it going to add something, or am I just putting it in and spending a little more money when I don't need to? What's the action? So what's it going to do? Is it just going to spread it out? Is it going to stick it and spread it? Is it going to help it uptake the active ingredient? Is there any phyto risk? Am I allowed to mix these products together? Is the manufacturer recommending it for these products to be used together, or am I risking it there being more chance of phyto, or is the phyto going to be, if you know, if it's high light situation, could I see more phyto risk? Generally, they'll be pretty safe, the adjuvants, but it's just something you want to consider with different tank mixes, and the manufacturers will generally have that information. And again, cost versus value. So that's one we talked about with the PGR. So on first looking at it, it kind of might look like a waste of money. It's like, well, why would I pay extra for something? But actually, if you're paying an awful lot of money for the products in the first place, and this is a kind of fraction of that, and you don't need to put that much in, and it's increasing the efficacy, then it can be worth it. And you've got to do that on a case-by-case basis. But for most growers, there should be an adjuvant out there for most products to sort of increase the efficacy. And it's something we think we'll see more of with more biologicals, so biofungicides or bioinsecticides, sort of getting more value out of those products as we apply them. So another really important consideration is boom height, and I think most of the testing they did, it was in the agriculture side of this, but essentially a boom height of 50 centimeters from the crop was considered the best to achieve coverage. And we know when we're using sort of, this is, you know, a boom spray, so you've got, let's say, flat fan nozzles. We know that the fans are going to have a certain pattern, and so if you're really close to it, the pattern isn't right, and it's going to splash too much, it's going to drift too much, it's going to, you know, bounce off the leaves. And if you're too far away, then that pattern isn't going to be good, and the two fans next to each other, the patterns are going to be sort of bumping into each other. So they're saying an optimized height of 50 centimeters is what they considered to be best. And what I found really, really scary was that if you double the boom height, you get up to 10 times the drift. So you know, that's a really scary amount. So if you've gone on from one crop with a boom height and you've changed onto another crop, and it's way smaller crop, it's just plugs, it's really worth adjusting that boom height, because you can really control that drift a lot. And you can see there the amount of effect it has. And you can see with as we talked about before, the air induction nozzles, it's going to have a lot less effect there, because they're maintaining that pressure, because it's acting like a larger droplet size, because it's got a bubble of air inside it, so it's acting differently. But with just a standard flat fan and variable pressure nozzles, the effect is really strong when you're starting to change those heights of spray. So yeah, that's a really important thing to consider with boom height. Again, super easy if you've just got one crop, just set it and done. A lot more difficult if you're a nursery growing lots of different things, but this is again one of those things you want to consider. So maybe set it to be optimum for most of the crops. Maybe you're going to accept that some aren't going to be getting such good applications, but it's just, again, conscious compromise, knowing what you're doing and making it as a decision. Yeah, I'm choosing for this to not be optimum, so everything else is perfect. So yeah, conscious compromise. We touched on this a little bit before, but forward speed is again going to be something that's really important. Again, it's something they've looked at a lot in agriculture, and you can see these are the exact same nozzles, exact same pressure, but when they're going at a low speed, the product is going down like we want it to, going down directly onto the crop. And when it's high speed, you've got a lot more drift, and it kind of, you'd start to think to yourself, well, it doesn't really matter because, it's all going in the crop. And even in a nursery, yeah, you're going to get some going on the path and some going in the glass, but it doesn't really matter, does it? But actually it does, because those strong droplets that are coming out of this low speed are going to be penetrating down into the crop more. Drifty droplets aren't going to do that. They're going to have no strength. They're really just going to, like a feather landing on something, they're going to gently land on whatever they land on. They're not going to be pushing down into the crop like we'd like them to. So the controlling that speed, and it again comes back to those bubbles we looked at the start, that low speed is going to give us that better control. So it takes longer in terms of labor, but we would argue that it does pay off in terms of you're going to get much better control out of the product that you've paid for. So digital support. So I live in Wales, so this is easy for me to remember, less relevant for you guys, but just www.wales as a mixing sequence. And this is available on the Syngenta Ornamentals website. So it's just an easy way to remember sort of how to mix. And I think as we get different products with bios and that kind of thing, it's going to get more complicated, but it's just getting things in the right order, making sure there's always water in the tank first, then adding anything that's going to be hard to get into solution earlier on, and then the things that are going to be really easy to get into solution, like soluble liquids, adding those last. And just, whereas if you do it in reverse order, there's a chance that soluble bag, not that there's that many products with water soluble bags, but that soluble bag has the best chance to go in. If you put it in last, there's a chance that just blocks up your filters and you don't get very good application. So yeah, it's just to consider the order that you want to put those products into the spray tank to get the best out of them. And on to the other sort of digital support tools that Syngenta have available. So we've got on the website, so it's just, if you just Google search Syngenta Ornamentals UK or Syngenta OC UK, we've got a load of different resources on there, and there's some really, really good stuff. So there's a load of videos on the art of application. We've got a sort of spray window, so anyone who's spraying sort of outside nurseries, you can type in your area and it's going to sort of give you a breakdown of spray windows. I know everybody has a different version of that they're using, but it's just there as an option. There's some resistance management tools. There's some really nice graphs. I think some of them need updating, but generally the concept is good, where we talk about product names and the actives of ingredients, so it kind of makes it easier for you guys to sort of build a program that's going to be good for resistance management, because I know it can get complicated that all the products have got different sort of product names, but maybe some of them have got the same active. So you might be thinking you're doing a really good rotation, but actually there's the same active ingredient in the 3 chemicals. So actually it's no good for resistance management, and you're not going to be able to control that sort of that pest you need controlled. And also onto some life cycles of disease as well. There's some information on there. We've got all of our a load of different social platforms. So just for more information, just follow us on those. And we do regularly try and put out horticulture blogs. So if you're following us on socials, we'll sort of always plug those so you're sort of available. And it's just one of those really good things to have for you guys, or the spray technicians, or just people in the team who are really interested to learn more, just knowing that those resources are there and available, so they can sort of continue that learning and keep up to date with what's going on in the ornamentals market. And then also on the Syngenta Ornamentals website, there's a load of different blogs on specific application things, so tips for longer nozzle life, time to get your spray ready, nozzle choice for ornamentals, so they can go into more details than I've had chance to go into today, and just some information there. So yeah, there's some really good resources there to get into. And then also for those of people who are like me and sort of more visual learners, there's some really good YouTube videos on them. Luckily, you don't have to watch me. It's Glenn Kirby who was doing the role before me. So there's 6 they're really short videos, but anyone who's interested, they're really worth a watch. And yeah, you can go onto YouTube, Syngenta Ornamentals UK, and watch the application videos. There's some good stuff on there as well. Yeah, so I've kind of flown through that a little bit, but I think the important point to come back to is just, again, considering what you want to achieve, and you're going to achieve better efficacy by doing it, and better longevity of the product. And whether we're talking about control of thrips, that might mean that maybe you don't have to do that 3rd or 4th spray this year, because you've done such good applications. And there's environmental upsides as well. If you've done a really good application, you're less likely to need to put more products into there. If you can do a nice preventative program, it's going to be much better than trying to play whack-a-mole curatively. And I know there's some pests that's very difficult to predict, but wherever we can, if we can move into that sort of proactive rather than reactive space, we're going to get much better control of those insect pests. But it's going to be the same for sort of fungal pathogen as well, sort of staying on top of it, getting the most out of the products we apply, so that yes, we've had to apply the product, but we've had a damn good stab at getting the sort of best out of it, and knowing that we've put it down in a good way. So I think that's everything for me. Do we have any questions, Connor?
Yeah, there's a few here. Thanks for delivering a very interesting and insightful presentation there, Sean.
That's all
And
right.
yeah, I think it's a very important message for our growers, as you touched on at the start. The financial burden of pesticide products and using them. And you wanted to get it right, and you want to get it right the first time around as well, because we're moving more and more to less products being available to the grower in their arsenal. So if we can get it right the first time, it's definitely going to be a huge benefit to the grower. And being able to apply it in an efficient manner as well, as you touched on, will help reduce labor and having the right machinery to do that. So there's a few questions here. The first one was, have you done any work or any tests on electrostatic sprayers to see if they're more efficient for leaf application? Have you come across that?
No, I've not. I know there's some people that are more, yeah, that are interested in the sort of vapor applications and those kind of like low volume applications. It's not something we've gone into yet, and it is partly because we're just really led by the crop side. So they're tending to do like sort of broad acre agriculture. So we sort of tend to get to pin our R&D onto that. But it's something I'll look into. But yeah, it's an interesting area, like yeah, electrostatics and whether that's going to up the
Where that's
efficacy and
going,
get the
yeah.
product where we need it to. Yeah.
Yeah, and the other one as well is maybe give some advice to the growers on regards pre and post spray application. I know you touched a little bit on leaf wetness, but is there anything else that the growers should be thinking about pre-spray application and even post-spray application to making sure the product and their application has gone correctly?
Yeah, so I'll kind of start in reverse order. I think for post, yeah, like making sure the product is sort of adequately dry afterwards is a really, really important step, making sure that irrigation doesn't go on or you're not expecting rain because that is going to have an effect. You're going to be taking it off before active ingredient. And it will depend on what product it is as to how long that process is of absorption. Some products will go on really fast and some products will need that little bit longer to interact with the leaf to be taken on. Another consideration might be sort of light intensity. So it will depend on the products. And I think all the Syngenta products are pretty photostable and it's not an issue. But if you're spraying something that we talk about in turf hot products, it's something that's going to have some more powerful sort of solvents in it. It can be risky if you're expecting a very hot day, or if you're spraying towards the middle of a hot day. That can sort of carry some risks because you are putting a bit more stress onto the plant. You're putting essentially all those things that make it really good at getting to where we need it to be on the leaf wax can have an effect on the leaf wax, and it can mean that if it gets very hot, that it can have an effect. So just considering avoiding big hot days, very sunny days that can have negative effects on the crop. So that's a really important thing for post. Other things for pre, I would say just making sure that things are sort of clean and clear. So if you do have problems with like mite infestations and things like that, just making sure you're removing any debris or anything from before you go, and making sure you've got a good clear run to make sure you can get the product sort of where you need it to go. But that's kind of a bit of a niche thing. I can't really think of any other pre-spray runs.
Yeah, yeah, very good. I know one of the big challenges that growers are facing here is that there's a range of crops growing in their system, and they all have
Yeah,
different plant architecture, and can be a challenge for them to get this, as we discussed there, the spray height, the boom height, and the nozzles correct. Like so, I think that would be a good insight to a lot of growers here and getting that understanding as well. Any other thoughts on that in regards to overcoming those challenges in regards?
yeah, the plant architecture thing, that is the biggest challenge for ornamental growers. And you'd speak to them within the crop side and they don't really get it because they're like, yeah, the whole field is the exact same. And it's like, no, we could be talking about tiny plugs in the same row or the same bed as huge plants that are just about to go out to market. So just design of, I guess, where you can, design of the sort of the setup of the nursery can be helpful for that. So if you can have all the stuff that's on the sort of smaller end together, then you're not going to need to adjust your boom sort of constantly, because that's the sort of worst case scenario, is having a really large plant next to a really small one in the same bedding, because you can't adjust boom height then. So if you can do anything like that, that will be really helpful. But yeah, you just kind of do the the best you can and make those conscious compromises, and yeah, just kind of consider where as much as you can adjusting the boom height between the different rows. So if you've got rows where they're nice and low, have the boom that bit lower and then raise it up to go on to the next round. But it's on a case by case kind of situation, but it's definitely worth kind of thinking about it on a case-by-case basis, because you will get more out of the product if you're in that sort of 50 centimeter range from sort of nozzle height to crop height. It's worth trying to do it. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, it is a big challenge, and yeah, it's something that needs to be considered from probably the get-go in the crop from your spray program going forward. If there's any other questions that you have, put them into the Q&A function or into the chat function. We can ask them. I guess the other one as well is, and I know this is an issue I've been at with a few growers, is getting that a message across to their spray operators that they need to take into consideration the product that they're using and the outcomes of that.
Yeah.
Have you any experience in delivering that note to the growers, or any advice for them? How would you sell it to them?
Yeah, it's one of those things, isn't it, that often at the higher levels it's fine and it's, yeah, I want to get the most out of that product, but then, you know, the spray tech hasn't received the message. So I think it is worth investing the time in them and in the training of them, and sort of bringing them into privy, and you know, having that, finding whatever way that goes across really well to your spray tech, because it is them at the end of the day that has the effect on it. You can have the best plans in the world, but if they're in a rush to spray because they want to go out or whatever it is at the end of the day, then it's not going to give you the same effect as if they spent the time and didn't sort of rush it and make it drifty. So I think spending the time with them and finding a way to motivate them to be like, look, this, you're having a really strong effect. We want to, whether they're environmentally motivated or whatever motivates them, just pitching it into the way that they like and understand. But definitely anytime you spend training your spray techs is a really good investment in time, because they're the ones at the sort of forefront of the fight there. So they're the ones that are really going to be making those decisions and considering those things and really critically thinking about it. And the people, that the spray techs you meet that are doing that, there's generally a lot less problems in those kind of nurseries, because they're taking that time and they're thinking about it critically. And sometimes it takes just, yeah, getting the right person, but definitely investing the time and pointing them towards those resources. And I'm sure there's other companies have got resources that are hopefully as good as what with Syngenta are offering, but just making them, you know, encouraging them to watch those kind of videos and those little things and hints and tips, and investing in them is a really good thing.
Yeah, yeah, it's a good investment long term for the grower to have a very
Yeah.
competent and skilled spray technician that they can rely on. And once they become aware of the crop and what it requires over the years, well, will pay dividends to them going forward. But there's no other, one more question. Have you any thoughts on ULV foggers? If hot or cold makes a difference, or have you any experience with that?
Yeah, from a Syngenta point, I don't know what the official line is, but from generally the sort of European team aren't that into it, but partly that's because none of our products have got it on the label, and it's a whole thing to get them registered in that space. But there's a kind of resistance issue, which is a bit of a worry, and I'll go into that a little bit, I guess. And it's essentially that if you've got a very small glass house, maybe you're going to get quite a uniform spray. So yeah, I like the idea that you're not needing to use as much water. You know, it's good in that way, and you're using a small amount of product. The idea is that in a small glasshouse situation, it's going to spread quite evenly across the crop. But as we get into sort of larger glass houses with like multiple bays, it's really hard to control the product getting into different areas. So what you can get is resistance issues, because the best thing for breeding resistance, if I was in a lab and I wanted to breed some resistant bugs, what I would do is spray a lower rate of an insecticide, because what that does is it gives them the optimum chance to develop characteristics that resist it. So if you spray them with the full rate, it's most of them will die. So it's quite unlikely that there's going to be a breeding population left to go on. If you spray them with a lower rate, there's going to be some that are like, well, I can just about handle it. So what will happen in those multiple bays is the bay you're spraying will get sprayed pretty well by the ULV, but maybe that next bay, it kind of drifts over some of those fine droplets that are staying in the air, which is what the ULV is designed to make. They're going to drift over there. And the problem with that is that if you don't then spray that on that same day, or, you know, it can lead to resistance essentially, because you're putting the perfect environment for those bugs to be exposed to sort of low levels of the product. And so then when you come to spray it, you're not going to have so much joy. And the other side to it is it's, yeah, I think it needs a bit more like sort of looking at from the regulatory side of things as well. I don't know that much about that side of it, but it's essentially, it's good. I like the idea that you can reduce operator exposure, because you just put it down in a room and leave it, and it's going to do its thing. But it's about uniformity of the spray, and in Syngenta, we feel that boom spraying is still going to get that better coverage, because we talked a lot about droplet size in that, and ULV claims to make everything tiny little droplets, but nothing is going to make a perfect profile of everything the same droplets. So you'll get the crops that are nearest will get those slightly bigger droplets, and maybe you get really good control, but then maybe towards the sort of edges of the glasshouse where you're going to get natural sort of turbulence of air, then maybe you're getting slightly smaller droplets there which aren't penetrating the crop as well. And a kind of a very good way someone explained it to me was that if that's a leaf, a plant leaf, not, you know, the idea is really nice. It's like, oh, we've got ULV, so all the product is going to get everywhere. It's going to get all the bugs and beasties, but nothing will ever land on the underside of a leaf. It's got to, there'd have to be real strong like wind turbulence, and the ULV isn't doing that. It's creating a fog that goes, so everything will settle down. You know, dust doesn't settle on the underside of a cabinet. It just doesn't. It can't physically settle there. So it's a nice idea, and it has the potential in certain situations to be really good, get really fine droplets and really fine spread, but it doesn't achieve necessarily what some people think it will in terms of it's going to go under the leaf, because it's still all about gravity. No droplet is going to go down and then just swing round and up unless it's got sort of momentum to do so. So yeah, it needs more work, and there's potential in that technology, but I don't think it's there at the moment.
Yeah, that's very interesting. Yeah, no other questions have come in, so I think that's everything. Just want to thank you again for taking time out of your busy schedule to deliver a presentation tonight. Found it very interesting. I know a lot of the growers have found it very interesting and informative, so it's much appreciated. If anybody has any other questions that you think of afterwards, you can drop me an email and I can send them over to you, sure.
Yeah, definitely happy to answer anything else that comes out of it, and it's really good to, you know, to talk to you guys, and thanks very much for making the time. It was really good.
Thank you. And as I said, the webinar will be available on the YouTube channel hopefully by next week. So if you can rewatch it again and share it with anybody else that might be interested in it. And as well, there's bases and Rosso points available for tonight. So if you want to get those, you can drop me a line afterwards and I'll get them into the system as well for you. So thanks for everyone for attending, and we'll see you all again soon.